All right, so as I said at the top, the Bengals did make a signing this morning. Isaiah Foski is who they are signing, and this is really interesting to me. He is an edge rusher, certainly a position of need for Cincinnati, but he is being signed to the practice squad, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw him sooner rather than later. Now, this week, no, I don't think you're going to see him unless something drastic happens, but like I said, he's a pass rusher. He was the 40th overall pick a couple of years ago in 2023, and he's only 24 years old here at this point. Kind of an interesting release by the New Orleans Saints. New Orleans, in my opinion, if I had to pick the worst team in the National Football League, I would say it is the New Orleans Saints. That kind of makes me scratch my head a little bit while they're already giving up on a young player that they allocated a high draft pick towards, taking him in the second round. The Bengals, of course, in 2023 selected Myles Murphy, and he, of course, hasn't panned out for Cincinnati either. They took him, obviously, in the first round. And Foskey, a guy that goes a little bit later on. So he does have some experience with Al Golden. He did play at Notre Dame, spent the 2022 season with the Fighting Irish and Al Golden, and finished with 45 tackles and 14 of those for a loss, 11 sacks in his final season at Notre Dame when he was with Al Golden. I really like the familiarity with players and Al Golden. I think it's an advantage that you really can reap when you have a guy and a defensive coordinator that is coming from the collegiate ranks, right? He really understands the college game. He has a feel for players that can have success at the next level, whether it's drafting and developing or guys that he coached himself. Of course, Howard Cross III, a member of the Cincinnati Bengals at this point as well. He was not active for week one against Cleveland, but he's a guy that spent a lot of time playing for Al Golden at Notre Dame, played a lot of snaps. So I think getting another member of the Fighting Irish onto this football team is a really, really good thing. And I think you need to trust the evaluation process of Al Golden here at this point. I think when you look at, for example, the Los Angeles Chargers, Jim Harbaugh, of course, spent a ton of time as the head coach of Michigan. Now he's in his second year with the Los Angeles Chargers. But if you watch Los Angeles, their past two drafts have been really, really good. Why? Because I think Harbaugh has a great understanding of the players that are having success at the college level and in turn can translate that success into success at the professional level. Similar situation here with Al Golden. I think the Bengals need to really lean on him. To me, this is clearly a very Al Golden-esque signing. You saw a lot of Al Golden draft picks, right? Barrett Carter, clearly an Al Golden pick. Demetrius Knight, clearly an Al Golden pick. And you could even argue Shamar Stewart, perhaps even an Al Golden pick as well. So Al Golden certainly changed the narrative around Cincinnati's defense in week one. I know I really was excited about it, and I think a lot of other people should be excited about it as well. Isaiah Foskey, news of the day reported by Jordan Schultz, signing with Cincinnati's practice squad. And again, I think at some point you can expect to see him out there on the football field for Cincinnati. When you look at that edge rusher room, obviously Shamar Stewart, who we'll spend some time talking about today, he had a really great debut, in my opinion. Didn't necessarily fill up the stat sheet, but I think he did a really nice job in that game. Trey Hendrickson, obviously a mainstay as an edge rusher for you. Joseph Osai had a really good game. I'll be the first to admit I kind of was banging on him this offseason and kind of not agreeing with the signing to bring him back on that 1 year, $7.5 million prove-it deal. But he comes back, and he had a really good game in week one. So those three guys are kind of locked in as your edge rushers that you lean on. And then you look at Cam Sample and Myles Murphy, and you're like, well, what are you going to do for me, right? Sample, not much of a factor in the week one game against Cleveland. He, of course, coming off a very significant injury, so it could take him a little bit of time to get up to speed. I believe he was a fourth-round pick a couple of years ago, signed a one-year deal with Cincinnati this offseason. I really like Cam Sample. I've said before that I think, borderline hot take, but if Cam Sample and Dax Hill are healthy last year, I think the team makes the playoffs, to be completely honest with you. Obviously, those things did not transpire. I still have belief in Cam Sample as a guy. Myles Murphy, I think we're all starting to lose the little faith that we had left in Myles Murphy. So the point being, the edge rushers that are on this team, I don't think all of them are necessarily locks to stay on the active roster when you have a guy like Isaiah Foskey, who's a young guy. He's 24 years of age, was a high draft pick, has the connection with Al Golden. There's a lot of signs pointing in the direction that he could potentially be a guy that plays significant snaps for this football team moving forward. So that is the news of the day, so to speak. Cincinnati signing Isaiah Foskey. and he, of course, most recently played for the Chicago Bears. We'll talk about the Bears a little bit later on in today's show, as they, of course, played last night. I predicted that they were going to win that football game, and it looked for much of that football game that was going to be true, and then it was another Chicago Bear-esque type of collapse. J.J. McCarthy turned into a guy that was competent and even more than competent, 2 impressive touchdown passes, touchdown run as well, so we'll spend a little bit of time talking about that additionally as we progress, but do want to spend a little bit of more time talking about the Cincinnati Bengals. Spend some time talking about the offensive line. Let's stick there for this point. Dan Orlovsky went on ESPN the other day, and Dan Orlovsky, in my opinion, as far as a national analyst goes, when you're talking about pro football, I'm not sure anybody's better. I'm a big Herb Street guy, but Orlovsky does a tremendous job. Really respect his knowledge and the way he gets his points across, what have you. But basically, I think it was on Get Up or one of the ESPN shows the other day. It was like, I'm ecstatic if I'm the Cincinnati Bengals and if I'm a Cincinnati Bengal fan. And I agree with him. A lot of people at the desk kind of laughed at him, saying, what are you talking about? The offense was horrible. You played Cleveland. You still gave up a decent amount of yardage. But they cleaned so much up defensively with the tackling that they showed in that football game and the ability to limit the explosive plays of the Cleveland Browns, which really kind of vaulted them into position to have success in that game. I completely agree with Orlovsky on that front. But shifting towards the offensive line, the Bengals' offensive line has always had issues with Cleveland, no matter who they roll out there. And I think at this point, there's enough data that suggests that this is just kind of the way things are going to be against the Cleveland Browns. Obviously, it's frustrating. Obviously, you don't want to have games where you don't record any yardage in the second half. That can't ever happen again. But Cleveland, for whatever reason, has had this Bengals team's number when it comes to limiting the things that Cincinnati can do offensively. There was periods there in the first half where I thought the protection was good, and there was periods in the second half when the protection clearly was not good enough. I think part of it also, Joe Burrow has to recognize that against that front, it's got to come out, and it's got to come out fast. Again, I don't really look back at the tape and say that, he should have got rid of that ball. He held on to it a little bit too much. There's maybe 2 throws you can pick apart with Joe Burrow. I think there was one over the middle where he had Jamar, kind of a bad throw. The one to T where he got hit late on the sideline. Maybe that can be completed if he throws it a little bit earlier. But for the most part, I think Joe Burrow did most of the things that he could have done in that game. But OBJ, a guy that gave up 2 sacks against Myles Garrett. Right? That's just kind of the nature of playing the game, right? If you have an elite, I don't know if I'd call Orlando Brown Jr. elite, but a really, really, really good tackle against the best pass rusher in football, the pass rusher is going to win. That's just kind of the nature of it. In my lifetime, there's only a handful of guys that statement doesn't really ring true. Trent Williams, of course, of the Niners, the first one that really comes to mind. But people that are sitting there saying, Orlando Brown Jr., he's in trouble, he's, off to a bad start, what have you. It's Myles Garrett. It's just kind of the reality of facing Myles Garrett. There's a reason he's being paid $40 million per year as an edge rusher, and there's a reason why he comes in and wrecks games. He's just a really unbelievable player. Now, on the other side of that coin, you could sit there and say, well, Stone, it's the NFL. Every team is going to have an elite pass rusher, and I think to some degree I would agree with that statement. Certainly Pittsburgh, right? I think you can put T.J. Watt in the same conversation as Myles Garrett, but I think it kind of gets undervalued just how good of a player Myles Garrett is. Again, all the NFL teams, for the most part, there's going to be one guy that is a borderline really, really good to elite pass rusher. That's just kind of the nature of it. Teams understand they have to have one of those guys if they want to win football games and win postseason football games. But Myles Garrett just really has separated himself from that group. I think there's a handful of guys you can put up there, T.J. Watt, Max Crosby, the first 2 that really come to mind. But Myles Garrett, I think, gets undervalued for what he does because he plays for the Cleveland Browns. I think if Myles Garrett was on imagine if Myles Garrett was on the Philadelphia Eagles. They might never lose, right? Or if he was on the Niners with Bosa, or, even like the Chargers or the Chiefs or a team like that, the Ravens. Heaven forbid how difficult that would be for Cincinnati. But the fact that he's on the Browns kind of doesn't give him the attention that maybe he deserves. And that he should get based on the performance that he can put out there on the football field on a game-in and game-out basis. So that certainly is something that is very interesting to me, and it's an issue that Cincinnati is going to have to continue to battle with as this season unfolds.